I wanted to be here this morning to provide an update on the public safety response. And I'm going to ask Chief Newsham to do that, and then we'll answer your questions.
Good morning. Thank you, Mayor Bowser, and again, thank you for your continued leadership through these very difficult times. I'm going to start by talking about an incident or an arrest that we had on Swan Street. This was arrest of significance. It was a mass arrest, which is something that we don't like to do, but we feel like we have to do in the instance that we believe we could have a threat to public safety. So prior to the arrests that occurred in the 1500 block of Swan Street a couple of days ago, we were monitoring a group that was exhibiting behaviors that was consistent with the behavior that preceded very violent events in our city the prior 2 nights. Some of that behavior was the throwing of different projectiles and also the burning of a Metropolitan Police Department police vehicle. We monitored that group. This was after the curfew. We monitored that group for a while. We were able to stop that group on Swan Street at about 9 p.m. And as you remember, the curfew was for 7 o'clock that evening. The folks that were arrested had been given multiple prior warning that there would be a curfew in the District of Columbia, and if they did not abide by the curfew, that they would be subject to arrest. Those warnings were in different forms. As you know, the mayor and I held a press conference prior to that, warning folks that there would be a curfew in effect at 7 p.m. till 6 a.m. There was a mobile alert that was sent out to electronic devices describing the curfew that would be in effect, and our police officers went over their public address systems to let people know that there was a curfew in effect and that they could be arrested in the event they violated the curfew. While effecting the arrest on Swan Street, there were reports of arrestees kicking in doors in that block. As you all know, that is a residential neighborhood. There was at least there was several radio transmissions by officers on the scene that the group was kicking in doors, and there was at least one call for service from a citizen who was relaying the same information to the police. Believing that there were burglaries occurring and that residences were being entered, the police did deploy pepper spray. The specifics of that pepper spray deployment will be investigated very thoroughly by our Internal Affairs Bureau, as is each use of force by members of the Metropolitan Police Department. A number of arrestees were able to escape arrest by entering into a home. Police quickly learned the apparent homeowner on the scene had allowed them into the home. The district commander, the commander of the 3rd District, was quickly dispatched to the scene because he has the most familiarity with that community and the people who live there. The district commander had multiple conversations with the person, Mr. Doobie, who identified himself as the homeowner. These conversations occurred not face-to-face, but through the window. Police officers reported from the scene, several police officials reported that between 10 and 30 arrestees were able to escape into the home. The homeowner, as you all know, Mr. Doobie, or the person who has claimed to be the homeowner, has done multiple interviews, some with national media. 2 of the quotes that I found particularly concerning to me, to Andrea Mitchell on MSNBC, there was a quote in parentheses, "Police were beating on people, putting their faces into cement." Another quote that was attributed to Mr. Doobie on Channel 4 was that he saw protesters decimated and beaten. Knowing everything that I know about the Metropolitan Police Department, our tactics That was very disturbing to hear. These are the facts that I have surrounding the arrest, and this is before the investigation obviously is thoroughly completed. There were 194 arrests on Swan Street. 190 of those 194 were adults. The arrestees were photographed on the scene and at prisoner processing during the course of the arrest. The arrests were effectuated by all police accounts without resistance. There were no visible injuries to any of the persons that were arrested. Of course, because, and I've mentioned this already, because of the allegation of excessive force, our Internal Affairs Bureau will do a very thorough review to get to the bottom of exactly what happened. I don't have any evidence at this point to corroborate the allegations that anybody was decimated and beaten. Let's talk a little bit about the protests yesterday. Yesterday marked the fifth night of protests in the city. They were obviously noticeably different than the ones we had seen in prior days. During the day, we saw groups assemble safely throughout the District of Columbia. Some of the areas of attention were the Lincoln Memorial, the U.S. Capitol, 14th and U Street, and Lafayette Park, which has been consistent throughout the demonstrations. As the evening progressed, we had a large group remaining at Lafayette Park. Other groups were marching through the city, smaller groups. By 11:30 p.m., the majority of the groups had remained in the northwest quadrant of the city and reunited at Lafayette Park, where they continued to gather peacefully. Many of the businesses and restaurants throughout the city previously affected areas such as Georgetown City Center, the downtown area, had boarded up their establishments in anticipation of potential vandalism and looting. Over the last days, I know that the mayor has met with many of these business owners. I commend her and I commend them for taking proactive measures for ensuring that their establishments remained intact. And I've talked about this previously. We are urging everyone, including members of the media, if you have any video or images of people that were involved in illegal behavior, destruction of property, or hurting people in the violent activities that we had throughout the city, please share those with us. We are offering a $1,000 reward to anyone that can identify people in those images. We put some of those images out already. We will be establishing a single source where people can review those images. At the end of the day, we believe that there was excess of 5,000 peaceful protesters in our city. As you all know, there was a number of federal resources that were deployed across the city. Let me see. Let me go into the arrests overall, just so you have some sense as how these days have proceeded. And the first night, Saturday night, when we effectuated arrests, we had 19. On Sunday night, we had 92. On Monday night, we had 288. And last night, we had 19 arrests throughout the city. The arrests throughout the city last night were generally individual arrests of people that were resistant to abiding by the curfew. What else do you all want to know? Okay, the persons that were arrested have home addresses. This is the overall numbers, 41% from Washington, D.C., or some association with the District of Columbia, 35% Maryland, 14% Virginia, 1% from other U.S. states, and 9% either no fixed address or unknown address. The nature of the arrests were 63% were curfew violations, 11% for felony rioting, 11% for burglary, and then multiple other arrests that were either 2% or less. I believe that is everything of significance that I have to share with you at this time. and the mayor can take any questions that you all might have.
I do want to say one additional thing, that the public safety recommendation has been that we adjust our curfew, and tonight, and we will get out the details of this, the curfew hours will be from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. Any questions? Yes.
Mayor, anybody who's gone around the city has seen an increased presence of military forces here. There has been some reporting that the district and the federal government have had a disagreement over the proper role of the oversight of the police department over these troops coming in here. Could you tell us what is the relationship right now between the district and the federal government over who is in charge of these streets, where these troops are coming from, and what we could see here if the president follows through on his promise?
Well, let me be very clear that the Metropolitan Police Department reports to the mayor of the District of Columbia. There has been some discussion about what the home rule charter would allow the president to do in the case of an emergency for federal purposes. The president has not attempted to make that a reality. So let me just be clear about that. Peter Newsham and the 4,000 Men Amendment of the Metropolitan Police Department report to me. We are, how shall I say, we are examining every legal question about the president's authority to send troops, even National Guard, to the District of Columbia, and if he has to make any other legal steps to do that. Another way to put it is, and this was part of my discussion with Attorney General Racine this morning, is does the president have the legal authority to request guard from other states? I have the authority to request guard from other states. I have not requested guard from any state. Yes.
Chief Newsham said federal partners were present here. News reports show that Customs and Border Patrol, the acting director, said they sent Customs and Border Patrol officers to the district. Could you or Chief Newsham explain what their role was here last night and what their role, whether he had a role in requesting their presence or you did?
We have requested, the only federal authorities that we have requested are the DC National Guard, very limited role, unarmed, to help us with a perimeter. And I think the number is 100 DC National Guardsmen, which you know are federal actually as well. We also, prior to that, requested FBI officers who we work with, and I think DEA officers.
What are your thoughts on Customs and Border Patrol being present in the district last night?
I don't know that they were present in the district. I don't know if the chief can confirm that.
Customs and Border Patrol was in the district, but it was not by MPD request.
Yeah.
So, the perimeter around the White House is expanded pretty dramatically at this point. It's kind of going as far up as maybe I Street or beyond that, and it's just preventing people from moving around as they normally would. What do you think about that fact that it's expanded? What do you think? What would you think if it expanded further? And then to you, Chief Newsham, a lot of strong words about what happened on Swan Street. Why come out with all of this today? Like, what's the reasoning here for saying these things?
So let me respond to your question as part of, we think that the federal purposes are being stretched. And there has to be a determination of what the federal purposes are being served. And that's what we will continue to examine legally and push back on.
And your question for me? I'm sorry.
Just to get some strong words about what happened on Swan Street, what you guys think happened versus what the homeowner and some other folks are alleging on social media and in the news. Kind of what was the motivation here for kind of putting out your...
I was trying to lay that out in my talking points, is that, when you make an allegation in this environment, that police officers were beating peaceful people who were compliant in being arrested. That's a very, very serious allegation. I think it would be irresponsible of me not to share the facts that I currently have at my disposal, because those facts, I did not see a lot of those facts out there in the reporting that I saw yesterday on this incident.
Yes, Kobe.
I was at 16th and I earlier, a few minutes ago. Who exercised jurisdiction over that block of 16th Street between H and I? Is it now under federal jurisdiction, or does the district have any jurisdiction over it?
That is a DC street, Kobe. I think that if I had to understand the argument that the feds are making, is that that is part of a perimeter to protect the White House complex. But I think that's going to be a point of contention. Yes, were you finished? Okay, yep.
This could be for the mayor or the chief, but clearly at some point a decision was made last night that you weren't going to try to clear out all the protesters. The crowd was far bigger than the night before when the federal authorities had moved in. Clearly, D.C. made a decision. We're not going to try to clear these people out of here in front of the White House.
We didn't try to clear them out before.
But you decided not. It would have been you last night, and you obviously decided not to.
It would have been them last night. What do you mean?
You guys let people protest last night.
We let people protest every night.
So you were not at any point going, like last night you had a curfew at 7 and you decided to let people protest if they were going to protest peacefully. And I did see MPD involved in arresting people the night before away from the initial incident.
MPD arrested people last night. Okay, so I don't want you to be confused. We have allowed peaceful protest every night. Who we are concerned about are people who are not peaceful and are destroying our city. Our curfew is a tool for MPD to make sure that they can put their resources to finding those people and detaining those people.
But clearly 288 versus 19 arrests, you decided not to enforce the curfew as much last
No,
night.
we decided, or the chief found that there wasn't destruction abound in the city. You follow what I mean? So, and he just explained the arrests before were to prevent that type of destruction. Yes.
Hi, I'm Emily. I'm a new reporter with the Washington Post.
Hi, welcome.
Thank you. I'm wondering if you have a list of the federal law enforcement agencies acting in the district in regards to the protests.
I'm not sure if we are keeping a list, but the feds are. They know because they're under their control, not ours. Yes, Mark.
Can you, both for you, the mayor, and the chief, is the curfew working as you guys intended it to? And is there evidence of that? What would you point to if you think it worked?
So I would say this, and I think the mayor said it very well, is that the curfew gives the police the ability to stop the violence that we saw 2 nights during the course of this event, the significant violence that we saw, and the way that we utilize this tool as we watch groups. Yesterday is a perfect example. If you have large groups that are clearly peacefully protesting, and they are not exhibiting behaviors that we believe have led to the violence that we saw in the city, those groups are going to be allowed to peacefully protest, because that's kind of the heart of what we do here in Washington, D.C., is we allow for peaceful protests. If there are indicators within a group that we believe may rise or increase in volatility, for example, the group that went up and was arrested on Swan Street, where projectiles were being thrown and cars were being burned, then I think it's our responsibility to ensure that that group's behavior is stopped, to prevent the volatility that we saw in our city. So it's not a perfect system, but it is I believe that it was very effective in ramping down the level of violence. If you look at the arrests, tell the story, you go 1992, 288, 19, and I'm hoping that tonight, today, the demonstrations that have already began to gather in the city, that tomorrow will be 0 arrests, and 0 arrests will continue for the rest of this event.
Chief, can I just follow up on Mr. Dewey? Do you believe that he harbored criminals in his home the other night?
You know, you could get into that technicality, and you talk about one of the police departments, the police department that I'm most proud of is ours. The level of judgment and restraint that our police showed when you had people running into a home where they had some belief it could have been a very serious felony of breaking into someone's home. For the police officers to use that judgment of not even to go into that home, because the offense at the end of the day, violating the curfew, is not a violent offense. It is, some would say, not a serious offense. And for the police not to enter that home and exacerbate that situation, I think it's something at the end of the day that we will look back on and be proud of our agency for doing. Did you want to ask me or the mayor?
Just a quick continuation on that. Were you able to make arrests of everybody who was in that house?
We didn't arrest anybody in the house.
Or the individuals that you were seeking, were you able to arrest? How did that interrupt the arrest you needed to make him harbor?
It didn't interrupt anything. And the numbers, I think, are in dispute as to how many people actually ran in there. So my police officials told me somewhere between 10 and 30. So it's probably, my sense is somewhere in between those two numbers. We've heard larger numbers, but people who could have been arrested for curfew, who had violated the law in the District of Columbia, were welcomed into somebody's home, and your police department exercised the sound judgment of using their discretion and not trying to make an arrest or an arrest for harboring whatever those technical arrests could be. Those didn't occur. So it did not negatively impact our operation.
Pardon me, Chair, I'm just a little confused. Are these individuals who had violated curfew, or are these individuals who are responsible for the burglaries, the kicking in the doors?
No, these were curfew violators. They potentially could have been involved in other behaviors, the burning of the car. Some of those people could have been involved in that, but I don't have anything right now to suggest that that's the case.
I just wanted to make that clear. And
okay. Why
not just continue the curfew you had yesterday?
I think that the protesters, and this is the mayor's decision. I don't know if you want me to answer this. I can. The conversation I had with the mayor is the largest group of protesters that we've seen to this point have been doing a little bit of self-policing. I think there was one indication of a sign that was pulled down, a street sign that was pulled down, and this person who pulled the street sign down was amongst a large group of peaceful demonstrators, and the peaceful demonstrators actually were yelling at this guy for, "What are you doing? This is a peaceful protest." So I think that the behavior of the protesters suggest that we should push the curfew back. We anticipate peaceful protests, but I think you also have to, out of abundance of caution, consider that our bad actors in the city over the two most violent events that we had occurred after dark. So hopefully, like I said, when we come in here, and if we have to come in here, and we probably will, the number of arrests will be 0.
Doesn't that make your job harder though, if you're pushing it back later on in the night?
No, I don't think in this instance it does. I think that it was a sound, reasonable decision to go to 11 o'clock.
Chief, can I just follow up on the Swan Street compared to what happened outside MPD headquarters? I believe you said there was an equally, if not larger, crowd outside MPD headquarters that same night, and you deployed munitions. We
did.
There. Were there arrests outside MPD that night?
There probably were some individual arrests. That was the last group that remained in the city. They were exhibiting the same behaviors that we thought could lead to violence in our city. At that time, munitions were deployed to disperse that group, and thankfully they were able to disperse.
So I guess my question is, why not the mass arrest outside MPD if you had the same type of behavior as Swan Street? Swan Street saw 200 arrests.
If we could have operationally executed a mass arrest there, we would have. There's a lot of challenges, which I'm not going to go into, in executing that type of an arrest. but that was not something I believe we could have successfully done.
Thank you.
Martin?
Just last quick one on Swan Street. Chief Newsham, obviously, I'm guessing all the officers here on the scene had body cameras. You mentioned the other day that they did, and you guys will review that footage. Will that footage be made available to the public and the press anytime soon so we can review it?
As you know, there's a process for requesting body-worn camera footage. You make that request, and we'll make a determination as to whether or not it can be released. As of right now, because there's an ongoing investigation, you probably will have to wait until that investigation is completed. I don't have any issue with having transparency about what happened there. In addition to body-worn cameras, I would assume that many of the homes have private cameras, and I know for sure that there was media on the scene. And actually, if you look at the media footage of the arrest, it was consistent with the way that I described it. We did not have resistance by the people that were being arrested, and the scene appeared to me, from what I saw in the media, to be very well in control and calm.
Okay. Dorothy?
When you finish answering questions on the demonstration, I would like to ask you a couple of questions about yesterday's election.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions on demonstrations? Sophie?
I just wanted to follow up, now that you know that the Customs and Border Patrol were in the district, what's your opinion on their presence here?
We are comfortable with the agents that we mention and have great familiarity with working with, and they include many members that we work with on demonstrations all the time, and I would add to that the FBI and the DEA. And I can't really say more about the other agencies and about who's directing them. I think that's what we should all be concerned about, who's giving the orders, and if they are going, the thing for us to be concerned about is who's giving the orders.
So is there coordination between your administration and people giving orders to Customs and Border Patrol, or are they?
We are not giving orders to federal police of any sort.
So is there coordination though? You might not be giving orders, but are you working with them? Do you know what they're doing here?
We are directing the federal assets that we've requested. I've already gone over, and we are not directing any federal assets beyond that. Yes.
One last riot question for the chief. Chief, this morning, I don't know.
One last, what is the, right.
Protest.
Okay.
This morning, about 2:30, MPD responded to DC Fire requesting assistance. Are you familiar with this incident?
I have limited information, so my understanding there was an attempt robbery of some of our DC Fire and EMS personnel in the 6th District, and that's an active investigation. It occurred this morning. So as details, I mean, if you have a specific question, I can.
So there's some anecdotal reports that perhaps these were actually rioters or looters who are looking for and actually demanding things like the Halligan bar, forcible entry equipment that may have been on the truck.
I've heard those same reports, but I can't say with certainty in that level of detail. But I if you want to follow up with me on that, Mark, I'd be happy to give you what we got.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yes.
And this one for the mayor, one for the chief. First, Mayor, do you expect the curfew to be more nights after this? Or
I don't know.
Okay.
We have been, we regard putting a curfew in place as something very serious, and we make that decision situationally based on our public safety needs. Yes.
Were you given notice that they were going to extend the perimeter from K Street to L?
No. Chief?
I know that they were that was something that they wanted to do. So I was in tune to the fact that was something that they wanted to, was increase their perimeter. And I think there's obviously going to be questions as to whether or not they can do that.
One last question for the chief. I know you were asked this yesterday and didn't have the full information yet, but one thing I'm still not clear on, because you're both saying you're using the curfew only for signs of violence, signs of trouble, but I did watch your bike officers help federal authorities on I Street after the curfew began on Monday night. What were they doing from your perspective?
I'm a fairly intelligent person, some would say, and some might disagree with that, but every single instance of police interaction that occurred over the last 4 days, I don't have at the top of my head. If you have a specific location, instance, and time, I'll see what I can find out.
It was
Let you
about 7:15 on I Street.
Yeah, that one, that's not ringing a bell, you know.
I mean, we have video. We put it live on television.
Share that with me, and I'll answer any questions that I possibly can.
Okay, Dorothy.
Mayor Bowser, how would you generally assess yesterday's primary election and the manner in which the Board of Elections conducted?
In a word, okay, maybe I can't do it in a word. And I'm saying this based on my experience as a voter and my reflection. I haven't been briefed by the board chair or any of the board staff, but I know that DC voters spent hours on the polls yesterday, and that is nothing short of failed execution.
If I could follow up, there were two major components of the failure. One was the issue of the absentee ballots being sent out by the Board of Elections, and then the other issue was the long line. With regards to the absentee ballot, were you aware, or your staff party to any of the planning that the Board of Elections did? And are you aware that the Board of Elections did not engage a mail order house to mail out the ballots and tried to do it with the in-house staff and the antiquated machinery that they have down there?
Well, I can tell you this, and we have allowed the chairman of the Board of Elections to present the board's plans at our press conferences, I think on at least 2 occasions. I believe the council invited the board chair to also make a presentation on his plans to the council members. And keep in mind that this is an independent body. The mayor, the executive, does not run elections in the district, and we have an independent board chair so that there's no political influence on the conduct of elections. So keeping that in mind, we offered assistance to the board on a number of occasions as it relates to the physical buildings, for example, and I assigned our DGS to work with them. We also offered them assistance with volunteers, and I assigned our Serve DC to recruit volunteers to provide poll coverage. We also provided PPE and sanitation equipment to the board so that they would have what they needed at that level. Now, it would be inappropriate, in my view, to get involved with who they contract with. Could we? I think we did make them the offer at one point when I first heard that people were saying they weren't getting their ballots. For some, we could recruit more volunteers to help if they needed help with that. So that's a long answer to your question. And no, I don't know about who handled what vendors they used.
Could I just follow up with 2 questions? One is, isn't the involvement of your administration a little bit more than what you just enunciated in terms of, didn't you direct your Director of the Department of Employment Services, Tommy Wells, to be your eyes and ears over the Board of Elections as we were going into the primary?
As a conduit.
Did he report back?
Yes, I directed Tommy to be like the communication arm with the board so that any of their needs that they communicated would be elevated through our administration. And that's exactly what he did.
At this point in time, what assurances can you give to DC residents and voters that the same problems will not occur in November for the presidential primary and the general elections in DC?
Dorothy, I am very concerned about it, and the confidence of our electorate in how this independent board operates is paramount. And I want to make sure I'm doing what's legally appropriate and getting a download from the board chair about exactly what happened and exactly what the plan is to fix it. And I can assure DC voters that We will have the appropriate action plan from the board and understand that from our level, and I expect that the council would require the same thing.
Can I just follow up? If you get a download from the board and the senior staff of the Board of Elections and you find it wanted, are you prepared to ask for some resignation?
I could not tolerate continued failed leadership or execution, so I need to know more.
About coronavirus.
Yes.
We spoke Monday about your concerns and Dr. Nesbitt's concerns about another spike given what's gone on in the city the last few days. Clearly, the police officers here have had a lot of close contact with people. Have there been any, if you had time, I don't know, any talks about maybe planning for what were to happen should we see a spike amongst police officers when we are in this time period right now of their critical need on the streets and defending the district? And have there been any new conversations with Dr. Nesbitt regarding what we could be seeing here over the next couple of weeks?
Well, we have been preparing for a medical surge, as you know. We didn't see a high level of surge happen in phase 0 that outpaced our supply of beds, ICU, ventilators. And we continue to have all of those, that surge capacity in place. I think our best thinking suggests that anything that happened over this weekend, we may not see for 2 to 3 weeks. But I do want to emphasize to people, the testing capacity that we have and the facilities that we have made available in the district. One thing that Dr. Nesbitt is very concerned about that over the past week, and shouldn't surprise any of us, our world has kind of been upended, that the numbers of people seeking testing have dipped over the last week. So we're all very concerned about that. I do want to emphasize that we made a new site available in downtown. We've had, I think, at least a couple of hundred people go through that site in 2 days of operation. So that site is available. And I'm not sure that we've discussed this yet, but because we've been working out the kinks, but we are going to make testing available across the city as well at a number of fire stations. 2 have operated so far that are serving largely people in the neighborhood, but when we have a map and a rollout plan for the and I know you're going to ask me which ones, and I don't know it off the top of my head. Maybe somebody else does. But I think we've operated 2 so far, and we've trained our fire and EMS personnel to do the sampling. And so we're going to make more sites available. Part of reopening, and none of us expected that we would have large protest activity on the day after our stay-at-home order was lifted. But part of reopening is the expectation that more people are going to get tested and need to be tested. And so we are continuing to work on making those tests more widely spread across the city. Yes.
Can I just follow up on COVID? And I know you've been very busy with other things. Do you have any idea when you might be able to tell us the metrics for getting to phase 2?
I expect, Mark, that we'll be able to focus on that this week.
And then have you already has Dr. Nesbitt determined those metrics already? Or?
I'm sure that Dr. Nesbitt and her team, believe me, they're looking at all of the data each and every day. She's not made any recommendations to me at this point, not because she's not ready, I'm sure, but because we've been here. But we are, I'm quite sure we'll get to it this week.
And then could I go back to the elections and just ask any reaction to, it looks like, well, almost definitely former Councilmember Jack Evans will not be returning to the council. and it looks like Brandon Todd may not return to the council. Just your reaction to those two races?
Well, what I'll say is this: people were voting, and the voters have spoken. And all of us who are in this business know that when the voters speak, we have to listen and work with the people that they send down here to City Hall to do their business. I guess sounds like I don't know if the Ward 2 race is still too close to be called, and certainly I know that there are ballots to be counted. I would also agree that it looks like we have a new Democratic nominee in Ward 4, and I know Brandon Todd very well. I know the great work that he's done in Ward 4. He should be very proud of his service. And I know that he will be able to hand off the progress that he's led to the next council member. Yes.
What is your reaction to calls to decrease funding for the police department?
Decrease funding for the police department? You have my budget. And my budget invests in making sure that we have the officers around the city that we need to keep DC residents safe. The deputy mayor could talk more specifically about those investments.
I think if you look at many cities, including DC's, and you talk to the police chief, it just takes one officer to carry out a bad act. What matters is recruitment, training, and accountability. One of those elements among the many that go into a good police force is recruiting locally. So in the budget, one of the investments we do make is expanding our cadet program, which lets MPD continue to have high school graduates come out of high school and enter the academy after 2 years at UDC. So that's one element in the budget. And rather than look at budget numbers, I think the discussion should be around recruitment, training, accountability, policies, and practices.
Yes.
One more question about the protest, sorry to bring it back there. What was your response and the police chief's response to the low-flying helicopters in the district, and do you know which agency deployed them?
I think we've discussed this. I'm going to ask the chief to talk about that. I can tell you that we think that it was a potentially very dangerous scare tactic that was meant to intimidate DC residents, and it was wholly inappropriate in an urban setting.
I'll say two things about the helicopters. One is the asset can be very valuable in monitoring crowd movement. Low-flying helicopters was unhelpful, and I've expressed that. And you asked what agency. It was a federal resource.
Chief Newsham, just a quick question, one more about the events of Monday night. Do you believe what the Park Police has laid out as saying there were credible threats against police as the inspiration for clearing Lafayette Park and the area in front of St. John's Episcopal?
Do I believe that?
Yeah.
I know throughout the days preceding that and on Monday, there were projectiles being thrown at law enforcement officers down in that area. And I do know that there were attempts to breach the perimeter down in that area. I was not on the ground at that time when they made the decision to move the president. That was a federal decision. That's my understanding exclusively within the responsibility of the Secret Service to move the President of the United States anywhere in the country or the world for that matter.
The Park Police has also said that the primary reason for doing all of that was to put up a fence around Lafayette Park. Do you find that to be the intent as well in your estimation and opinion of what took place on Monday night? I'm
losing you a little bit as to what we're talking about. The fencing didn't happen till well after the movement of the president. So what's the question?
Have you seen the Park Police statement? Do you believe that to be factual?
I have not seen a Park Police statement on this.
Martha?
Just kind of circling back to what Tom said, given all the protests and the fact that this is still a pandemic, are you encouraging folks who are protesting to go get tested? Could they call the citywide hotline, go to the 3 testing sites, and get tested just by virtue of the fact that they were surrounded by lots of people for long periods of time?
I think that they need to call the testing site, and they should get tested if they were exposed or have reason to think that they need to be tested.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.